Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Landscapers Grow Together interview series. Today, I've got with me Sean Adams from Contractor Innovation. Very pleased to have him with us today. Hi, Sean.
Hi, thanks for having me, Maddie.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Let's just jump right in. We're going to talk about automation and sales in this episode. Sean, can you just tell us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think I have a pretty similar story to most common contractors, especially in the green industry. So I started a landscape contracting company just around high school age, just to, kind of pay the bills and have some fun, pushing a lawnmower around the neighborhood, that kind of thing. And it escalated quickly. As I started to go through high school, I was recognizing that there was real opportunity. It was growing quickly, organically, and was trying to figure out if I was going to go to college full time or kind of pursue the entrepreneurial journey a bit, and decided to actually stick with that. It was what I knew and wanted to try to grow because of the opportunities I saw. So spent the next about 8 years or so growing that company. And we focused on actually bringing on a full installation division as well as our maintenance. And we grew very quickly, and I kind of experienced all the natural pain points of losing guys and losing sleep and losing everything else in between there, and getting burnt on many things just from being naive and not understanding these things. And it took me to some low points of actually figuring out that maybe the problem was my ego and me having to let go and learn and read and surround myself with the right type of people. And that's when I started learning about systems and understanding that I needed to replicate myself because I was the major bottleneck. And once I found that out, started putting small automations and changes, understanding technology, and that there could be a process to this madness out there, everything started to change for me. And that's when I was able to kind of work myself out of the field, assume more of a CEO sort of role. And things kind of took off from there. It took me about the last 5 years or so to kind of figure out how to put those systems in place in my business and dig myself out of the hole I had dug, and ultimately assume more of a CEO role in my company. And I got it to the point where it was really automated, and I was able to ultimately sell the company. And over the past couple of years, I've actually been able to take what I learned and the systems I put in place and help other landscape contractors to get that clarity and put systems in place in their businesses.
That's awesome. And what does that take the form of now? So are you coaching? Do you have a software system?
It's actually a bit of both. So it started as a pure consultancy and advisory, where I was just helping people one-on-one, kind of hearing their stories and figuring out what from my experience and my sort of resources in the industry, how I could help them implement some strategies. I have tons of content and those sort of things. So I'd help them to say, hey, you take this system, this documentation, this little bit of training, and mold it to your own offering, see if that helps you in some way. And naturally, that kind of rolled into a software program, which we just had launched this year, actually, which is a sort of a centralized way to take all the systems and processes in your business, or lack thereof in most of the cases for green industry people, and give them one spot to pull templates and to actually put all the stuff that sits in their head and drives you crazy from a bottleneck standpoint, and actually have a way to reference material, to kind of have training documentation and standardize what you do on a daily basis.
So when you kind of discovered that you could automate stuff in your business, would you say that you were kind of late to the game? Like, did you wish that you'd done it earlier?
Absolutely. It took me way too long to adopt technology. I was using some really crude and broken methods in the beginning, paper and pencil. And when I would go back and calculate things, there was so much money I left on the table by just not being diligent about letting technology take over. I thought I could handle it all myself. And there's just way too much influx of information, and the computer cannot lie. It only crunches the numbers. And that was just a huge light bulb moment once I recognized that I could actually replicate some of the things that I was doing manually that were taking me 15 to 20 hours a week. Technology could take over and do them in a half hour with my assistant. So I wish I did it 5 years earlier than when the light bulb actually went off for me.
So give us an idea of some of the automations that you're talking about, just for those who maybe haven't got into this at all. Are we talking emails, sending quotes?
Yeah, so it really starts from the sales process end of things. So what I recognized is I kind of looked internally from a mindset perspective and said, what do I enjoy doing? What activities in my business would I be doing whether I got paid or not? What do I really take joy? And for me, it was the interaction, the sales process, business development, finding new contracts, and really growing those CEO sort of tasks. So I said, okay, I need to kind of frame out systems and automations that can take over some of those extra things on the outside of that, so I could focus on the insulated portions of the sales process. And what I learned was I needed to get in front of as many people as possible. And to do that, I had to have some sort of consistency to what I was doing. So we had a great organic system because of our referrals. And that really happened by accident. I just noticed that there was kind of a natural flow to what was happening in my business. But the reality was it really had its peaks and troughs because I could not predict it. It was incredibly reactionary. So I would just sit at home and a call would come in, great. And then I had no way of replicating that call for the next point or a low point in the season. So that's when we implemented things like a referral system. And we put things into our emails, into our invoices. Once we initially took on QuickBooks, it then moved into Service Autopilot was a system that we used. And we were able to actually automate our email. So when we sent out invoices, we had links on there for rating our service, making sure if there was an issue that we tackled it head on, if there was a complaint or some kind of account issue that they needed help with. And then on the back end, it was if you were happy with the service, would you consider reviewing us and possibly recommending us to a neighbor? So small little incremental changes like that helped us build out huge pipelines of work, and we could actually have a system to that. So once I knew where the work was coming in and that we had consistency, I could then actually predict what my next steps could be. And I could say, okay, I know I'm going to get this much work. Well, if I want to double that up, what are my next avenues? And then we were looking at Google ads, and it was just at the cusp of when Facebook ads were starting to come together. So that was, we just had a back end experience with that. So it was just kind of understanding that these platforms, we could find experts in those spaces, utilize their systems, kind of understand what worked for our business. And then we had this consistency each and every time. That way, what it ultimately did was funnel down to me to get me in front of more customers. And that was the entire goal.
I love that. Did you ever offer incentives for people to refer you? Or Absolutely. Was it just kind of hammering them with the message, please,
We made a point in the beginning. We made a couple mistakes where we were hitting people far too often and being a little too pushy. And that was just because we didn't understand the technology. We had to throttle that back and kind of understand that. But once we did that, we found the proper cadence of when you should reach out to people. There was just a couple of points that we could make there. And what we would do is do incentives like a $25 gift card if they grab something, or $100 off the next project if it was over $3,000, and incentives like that.
Okay, I think that's the important thing, isn't it? Because I speak to so many people who they don't necessarily advertise and they kind of rely on referrals, but they feel like it's not reliable enough, and so they're not able to grow in the way that they want. Whereas I think doing those kinds of programs is important for if you want to kind of build things that way.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think you talked about maybe the opportunity cost of not automating and not getting these systems in place. What would you say to a business owner who is maybe struggling with the idea that perhaps they should try and automate and get technology involved and lose a little bit of control, personal control? Why is it important, and what are they missing out on by not doing this?
Yeah, no, you brought up the key word there, opportunity cost. That's a phrase that people really don't understand and give enough reference to in their businesses. And what we mean by that, especially in the green industry, is recognizing that as a small company, if you have a few people in the field, maybe you're still working in the field, all the tasks, all the decisions, all the responsibility in your business right now funnels through you, and you are the single point of contact. And what happens is that also means that you are taking on tasks that have the ability to be outsourced for $10, $12, $15 an hour, but you're still taking them over, which intrinsically means that you're valuing your time at $10 or $12 or $15 an hour, because you're taking your actual effort and you're exchanging your time for that amount of money in return. So those things are a huge opportunity cost because you could be using that time to turn over to high dollar per hour output tasks, such as selling more work, going to a networking event, putting a system in place that maybe saves you time on the back end, training your team. There's a million different better ways you could spend your time. And that is really a huge piece of when I recognize how powerful technology was and say, okay, I could actually get a virtual assistant to help me with admin. I can actually get a Facebook consultant to help me with ad spend and understanding how to actually build a predictable pipeline for my sales. How I could actually say, okay, well, we're going to do a referral system. This software can take over that for me. And now in 15 minutes a week, I can just check out the reports and see how it's doing rather than me manually calling people, manually going out, handing out cards, and the same percentages of the closing percentages were there. So that's where the opportunity cost really kind of showed its head.
I think it always seems a bit daunting because it seems like you have to take time out in the present to set all of these systems up, and you feel like you never have enough time to actually sit down and do it. But when you reflect on the opportunity cost, I think that's when you think, okay, I can and should dedicate this time. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
For sure.
So we talked about, or we mentioned sales, and I know this is a focus of the help that you give people with Contractor Innovation. What does a good sales process look like for, let's say, a landscaping company who does, these big like installation projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So initially we talked about the first bucket of a sales pipeline, which is going to be attraction or lead generation. We need to get people in there that have interest in working with us. And that is the first kind of phase. And obviously those methods of attraction, Facebook ads, Google, organic, those are all different traffic methods that are coming into our business. But the next step is to have some sort of way to pre-qualify them and figure out if they're a good fit for our business. So this was where the next sort of system that I put in place was. And at the time, it was kind of right before text messages became as ubiquitous as they are now. So most of our leads were coming in via phone call or voicemail. So what we would actually do is we implemented a system to screen them through. We had a very tight script that I left my admin that could walk them through a very qualified sales conversation to see if we were the right fit for them and vice versa. And it had a series of questions that could break down getting their buyer's intent, seeing around what their budget was, understanding their time frame versus what our projected schedule looked like to make sure it was aligned, kind of understanding where their region was, all these pre-qualifying factors to kind of shake down and see if we ultimately were the best fit for them, and that we had intention from them and some sort of working budget before we actually step foot on the property, especially for a larger scale work. We actually got to the point and we refined our system so well that we were able to pre-qualify them in the conversation to the point where we could actually work on and charge them a on-site consultation fee. So we were able to do that through just a series of qualified questions. And it basically ultimately said, you can see that we're booked out for the next 30 to 60 days. That's because of the level of quality. We are not the most the cheapest company out there, but we're providing a higher level of service. You're installing a pool in your backyard or a landscape. This is a 10, 15, 20-year project. So it's not something that you really need or should be rushing. There's really going to be no difference if you get it done by this weekend or, 2 months from now. You might miss a party or two, but you want the quality to be there, and that's utmost important. So we'll come on site. We charge $250 to meet. But if you decide to go with our company, we'll take that right off the top of the project. So you won't actually pay for that consultation fee. And it showed a level of professionalism and that we were going to really take our time and go through this process with them and educate them from the start. And we did that through the script. And then once we got on site, we just continued to provide value, show them differences, explain the products. And it was a long, elaborate, basically a presentation that we put on for them. So that was kind of how we pre-qualified them to get them to the proposal stage. And then once we got them there, we actually submitted that proposal. And from there, we actually had some software take on as well. And feel free to stop me if there's any spots you want to jump in. But essentially, we would submit a proposal and then have a follow-up system behind that on how frequently we wanted to reach back out and see if they were interested, if they had questions, if there were specific things that were maybe we missed during the process, to see if we could, ultimately try to close them at some point, or at least arrive at a decision. If they were not interested, we wanted to make sure we could close them off as well.
I think a couple of things you mentioned there were really interesting. One was actually charging for the consultation and then taking it off the final price, because I know so many companies that they'll do the on-site visit for free. But I think it positions you as, really quality and high end to actually do that, as well as filtering out people who aren't necessarily that serious. So I really liked that. The other thing I was going to ask is, it's one of those industries where, because of the high pricing, sometimes people will get this, ticket shock. They'll have no idea what a project that they want might even cost. How do you go about, or do you have any tips for kind of pressing on the kind of price objections and making it clear that, you're selling a dream kind of thing, you're selling like that feeling of the customer looking out the window and seeing something beautiful every day. Do you have any kind of quick advice for that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this goes back to our process we put in place for pre-qualification. So in that script that we built, and it took us probably a year and a half to refine the script that we actually have available for download. We've sent it out to a couple people in our Facebook groups, but essentially it works them through that process and gets to the point where we talk about the scope of work that they're interested in. And the recognition, first and foremost, is for the salesperson or the admin to recognize that the person on the other end of that phone, the homeowner, is calling a professional, which means they are not the professional and they're seeking guidance and help, because they probably don't know what the best option is for their company, for their property. They don't know which materials would fit best, the blend, the design, all these other factors, why they're calling you. So you don't want to just say, what are you interested in? Here's the price, because that's just going to blow them off completely. You want to ask those pointed questions to kind of get their feelings, understand why they, maybe they're having a graduation at the end of the year and you need to have this particular portion done, or they want to spend more time with their grandkids, so they want to have the backyard opened up, or whatever those factors are. Recognize the emotions tied behind that. And then you want to try to appeal to them by saying that, this is, as I mentioned, this is a long-term investment or an asset in your property. So we're going to give you that advice, and we're actually going to say, okay, if you're interested in something like a patio, let me talk to you about a couple of the options here on the phone, just so we're both on the same page, so we don't waste anyone's time. So if you're really interested in something like flagstone, you mentioned that you saw on Pinterest a really nice flagstone patio that you loved. Just know that, we've put in many flagstone patios. They usually start anywhere from like $3,500 up to about $8,000, depending on the size. And if the person's like, whoa, that's way too much, say, oh, that's more than fine. There are other options. We could go with concrete. We could go with a pea gravel. We have alternatives, and here are the general pricing brackets that we can give them. And the key is that pricing bracket. You don't have to lock yourself into some perfect square foot number, but that bracket, even if it's a ridiculous like $5,000 to $15,000, that is still frames their mind, because they might say, oh, that's about what I was thinking. That's okay. Why don't you come out and we'll talk about it further? Or they say, there's no way, that's way out of line. And then you can say, okay, well, here's the alternatives. And they might throw something back at you that is outside of the things that you handle, but now you just saved yourself that trip and you didn't waste their time either. So that's the beauty of using those pricing brackets to kind of just break out the things that you do, the alternative options, and then giving them just that information. They don't know what these things cost. That's one of the primary reasons they're reaching out.
Yeah, I really like that. I think a lot of people say to me, this is such a competitive industry. There's tons of these companies in my area, and they really want to differentiate. And if they're in a position where they're kind of bidding against another company, that can be a difficult sales scenario. So I'm pulling this question out of the hat, but do you have tips for that kind of scenario?
Yeah, differentiation is key. You have to try to kind of segment that. I was on a call a couple of days ago, and I was explaining how, if you're driving into a city, you'll see gas stations all along, and they may all look exactly the same. The only thing they're competing on is being a commodity. So they're only 1 or 2 cents apart in their pricing. And the only way that they can compete is by lowering. So the customer might drive over to one lot and fill up with fuel. And then because it was 2 cents cheaper, the next day they go over to the next one. There's no loyalty there if you're purely competing on price. And if you're in this for the long haul, you do want this installation project, but you probably want the maintenance contract with it as well. And you probably want them to call you for the next project that they're interested in, and their neighbor's project, and their son-in-law, and it just kind of grows organically like that. So you need to look at it from that framework, and then you need to be able to say, okay, what is it about my story from a company perspective that I could paint the best picture for this client? Because you want to be outright in that pre-qualification process to recognize that you won't be the cheapest. You might be the second highest or the highest company in there, but what can you guarantee about your system that is better, especially with like landscape materials? What we did that worked really well is when it comes to plants, people are completely clueless for the most part. They have no idea how to take care of them. They have no idea what goes where, if it's sun, shade, water tolerant, drought tolerant. So if you can provide that expertise, but then on top of it, put something like a guarantee behind it, we would actually, for higher end projects, we would say, we will guarantee this entire landscape installation for life. So we'll guarantee it for 35 years if we are able to own the maintenance contract our entire maintenance contract for the life of these plants. We'll guarantee that it lives. And people are like, well, why would I ever do that? All the follow-ups, all the pruning, you'll quadruple your overall net profit probably on the first year by taking the entire huge maintenance contract and maintaining that throughout the life of that plant. It's going to make the homeowner be like, wow, that's a huge value that I'm gaining by knowing that the plants will always look good. You've gained all that new service or maintenance contract and kind of guaranteed all of that as well. So it's a win-win. You have to find little nuances like that that speak to the quality of your company, the story that you're telling, and then how that could be perceived by the homeowners.
I think that's really important, actually, is to not necessarily assume that the homeowner is price shopping. And so your kind of play on that doesn't have to be to drop your price to match the other company. It actually could be to increase the value, as you described, or some other way of doing it. So I think that's really, really important. Okay, one last topic I want to cover with you. I wanted to ask about, you said you sold your company eventually, and I'm just curious about the process. Did someone approach you, or did you kind of go out and deliberately, wanted to put it on the market, so to speak? How did that work?
Yeah. So I'll plug a really great book. It's called Built to Sell by John Warrillow, I think his name is. I read that book probably 6 or 7 years ago, and Built to Sell essentially says that you should build your company as if it could be sold at any moment. And the reason for that, even if you have no intentions of actually selling it, maybe you want to pass your business on to a child or a family member of some sort, and you want to keep it in the family. The intention is to actually be putting all the systems in place so that someone else could take over the company at some point. So once I started to recognize that I was no longer the key driver to all the decisions in the company, I recognized that it was very possible I could remove myself and the operation would still move smoothly. So I had started to kind of see the value, and honestly, I went through so much pain and poor experience in going through everything that went into my small business. When I would talk to peers and subcontractors and other people, they were all experiencing the same thing. And when I went on forums, it was by the hundreds of thousands. And I'm like, I want to make an impact that's greater than just my small business. I think that more people need to learn about these systems. They need to learn about techniques and tactics out there. So it kind of had my draw of, that was my kind of why. I wanted to say, you know what, if I can actually exit this company successfully, I think I can make the largest impact by taking my knowledge and the process I went through and helping other people get out of the pain, and the trouble that they're in right now. So that was kind of the driver for exiting. And I actually had a local competitor who we became friends. We started subcontracting work back and forth. We had a candid conversation one day. He needed workers. I had the workers. He had a project I wanted. We decided to kind of combine forces, and then we just worked out a plan and decided that he was going to buy me out. I stayed for about the first quarter of that next year, helped him smooth over the contracts and systems, And then ultimately he took it over. So the timing was right for me, and I was kind of on and ready for the next chapter.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And like you said, handing over control of systems as opposed to handing over, what's in your brain as to how you run the company, I imagine was a much better way of doing it for the exit. So yeah, and it sounds like it's worked out great. And now you're helping people, providing I'm sure is like a really helpful thing to people in the space, which is awesome. So thank you, Sean, for joining us today. I'm going to drop the links to your website and social media below so that everyone can go and follow you. And yeah, stay tuned for another episode. Thanks so much again.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.